Greetings and welcome to your destination. You reached the Psychological Wellness Hub. We aim to help you build your knowledge and wellness around better understanding mental health and psychological concepts. Welcome back to the channel. Today's topic is another psychological wellness skill. That is psychotherapy skill number 2, helping you help yourself. Remember to watch videos on psychotherapy in general to get more information on what psychotherapy is. See the links below in the description. Psychotherapy Treatment, a quick review. It's a form of talk treatment that focuses primarily on mental health, substance use disorders, or other medical conditions, and many more. It's a journey of self-discovery and healing. Therapy involves you and your therapist working as a team. You are the navigator and the therapist is the guide to help you understand and make use of your thoughts, feelings, and actions. This is an effort to identify and, if necessary, make changes for the positive and to promote healing. Now let's look at that second skill to benefit your psychotherapy treatment. Psychotherapists have a saying, "We are here to help you help yourself." Let's say that again. We are here to help you help yourself. Many patients, clients, and consumers hear the first part. We are here to help you. So they expect to sit back and wait for the magic to happen. This is unfortunately a very crucial mistake. They don't hear the part about help yourself. This part, or missing this part, handicaps their ability to fully benefit from the treatment. The help yourself part is just as important as the other part. Without it, or your effort in therapy, it is likely to be not effective. If this happens, your therapist will be putting in effort and at times doing your part. The therapy will get little movement or traction. This will be like treading water and you will not move anywhere or very little movement toward reaching your recovery goals. It's like saying, catch a man a fish and he will feed his family for a day. Teach a man to fish and he can feed his family for a lifetime. This often is a crucial mistake, as mentioned earlier, where individuals walk away from therapy feeling like it didn't work for them, feeling like it wasn't something that was helpful to them. Another way to think about it is when a therapist gives you feedback on your efforts in therapy, you can see this and apply it to your situation, or you can get defensive and create barriers to healing in your therapy. It's like when a trainer is offering you feedback in the gym. You can choose to hear one of two things. You can hear the trainer is saying, if you do this, you might get more out of your efforts in the gym. Or you can hear the trainer saying you are doing it all wrong and that the wrong is what's wrong with you. What is the value of learning to be active and learn to help yourself in your psychotherapy treatment? First thing first, a right therapist is of no value to you if you don't bring forth any of your abilities. You bring the expertise of yourself and put that together with a professional who has expertise in psychological healing and human behavior. Combine these two makes the ingredients necessary for the mechanism needed for the treatment to work and the healing to proceed. Psychotherapists are trained to be objective. They help you see beyond your blind spots in life. The relationship opens a portal to further knowledge about yourself. You working together with that therapist to expand on that. Knowledge increases your ability of what to look for. Knowledge increases your ability of what to do in healing and dealing with your struggles. Barriers to being active and learning to help yourself in your psychotherapy treatment. Here's a brief list of some barriers. Excessive doubt, excessive excuses, I can't. Letting your personal protection system go into overdrive. If it's too active or hypervigilant for external threats, you will never be able to allow yourself to really absorb and participate in the therapy. Excessive stress. Excessive use of psychological defenses, things like denial, projection, rationalization, splitting, deflection, displacement, and more. Rating how you feel in the moment as how you will always feel, forgetting that we don't always feel this bad. Negative thinking is not bad, but it can help us. But sometimes if it becomes the dominant focus by our choice, it can hurt us. Focusing too much on our weaknesses and not enough on our strengths. Too much of telling ourselves we've tried, but not actually giving it a fair shot. Too much venting compared to exploring and resolving the problem. Let me say that again. It's okay to vent, but venting only gets us so far. Avoid learning more about and exploring your difficulties. Exploring your difficulties too intensely for too long without breaks in between. Tapping into learning to being active and learning to help yourself in psychotherapy treatment step by step. Here are some ways to tap into the resources of helping you help yourself in your psychotherapy. Forgetting that some focus on weaknesses and pity can actually be helpful. It's what we do with those afterwards that makes a difference. That action or that follow-through afterwards. Remembering to look at the light in the darkness. Remembering to keep things simple, one day at a time, step by step. Relate to yourself daily. Remember to look at yourself and relate to yourself. Remembering that you only get a short time in therapy each session. Your thinking and processing outside the therapy time is crucial to closing the loop on working through your recovery. Remember that practice assignments and homework are there to help you build your skills further and close the loop on your recovery. Connecting with your support system. Use your therapy habits to build on this and those relationships. Contribute to your support system. Helping others and yourself in moderation. Structure that can lead to sources of help, things like work, school, clubs, organizations, volunteering, and exercise. Studying your efforts in therapy and ways it shows itself. Build on this. This is part of how insight is gained and how therapy also works. Examples. I'm going to read some examples of individuals who tap into helping themselves in therapy. Please note these are not real people, but their stories represent real scenarios. Listen while I tell you about their story. Listen for how they found ways to build on this to help them help themselves in their psychotherapy. Don works as an electrical engineer. Don has been to a number of therapists in the past and often left feeling defeated and with the conclusion that therapy doesn't work. One day, Don meets a new therapist and he describes these perceptions. The new therapist explored this with Don a little bit. The therapist then clarifies what Don's role is in the therapy, what his part is. Don looked confused and said, "I don't know what you mean." The therapist then asked, "How did you get the most out of your therapy last time? How did you do your part and work towards your goals?" Don continued to experience confusion and said, "Well, isn't the therapist's job to help me get better?" The therapist asked Don, "Has he ever heard the expression, 'We are therapists and we're here to help you help yourself'?" At first glance, Don was unimpressed, as it sounds like a straightforward statement, and he said, "Well, I am here, aren't I? Isn't that enough?" The therapist explained to Don that that is a good start, but did that alone help you find success with your other therapists? Don replied, "Well, I showed up for my appointments and I listened." The therapist replied, "Good." Then asked Don, what did he do with the information the therapist spoke of in the therapy room? Don said, "Well, like I said, I listened and talked." Then the therapist asked Don, what did he learn about himself? Don said, "Well, I learned that when I talked to the therapist that I tend to have trouble with intimacy and commitment." Then the therapist said, "Is that what you learned or what you heard?" Don says, "Well, more heard than learned because he was a professional and also because I expected the therapist to fail me like the rest of them." Don said, "Well, more heard than learned because he was a professional and also because I expected the therapist to fail me like the rest of them." Then the therapist asked Don, "What did you do with the information once you left the session?" Don replied, "Well, I heard it when I was there, but after, I didn't think much about it." The therapist then asked Don to revisit the question of what did Don put in terms of efforts to help him help himself in his prior therapies. At first, Don became defensive over this, and he felt like the therapist was insulting him. As they continued to talk about it, and the therapist said, "If you want to get in better shape, and you reliably went to the gym and listened to your trainer, but then kind of poked the weights, would you really reach your goal? Would you really get to those physical goals that you're going towards?" Don said, "Well, no." Then the therapist said, those same principles apply in here? If a person is wanting to get better, and I'm like the trainer, but that person chooses not to lift any psychological weights in here, will they get any better or reach their goals?" Don said, "Now that you put it that way, no." Therapist then challenged Don to look at his efforts in therapy and how he could capitalize more on them, how he could lift the psychological weights too to get towards his goals through his efforts. Don said, "Well, the prior therapist said I have problems with intimacy and commitment. You know, I've heard that from others too, and I tend to get defensive and shut down." Therapist asked what, if anything, Don would like to do about this right here, right now in this room. Don says, "Well, I felt like this was a waste of time before. I came in here today, but as we talked about this, I think I need to apply myself more. I want to get something out of this." Therapist says, "Right. What you put into this is what you get out of this." Don says, "Yes," and then talks more about his fears in relationships and why commitments to letting someone in is so scary for him. Then therapist asks if he and Don can do a worksheet on this to look at all the parts of this pattern that Don describes. Don helps the therapist help Don bring out some of the feelings and some of the behaviors that go along with the thoughts about fear and commitment. Don is then able to make a connection with what he saw on the paper and other patterns in his life where he hesitates and becomes vulnerable to communicate with others. This is further explored with a therapist And the therapist asked Don what we can do about this pattern at home. How can we apply what he learned today here in the therapy room to his home life? Don stated that he could tell his girlfriend how he grew up in a home where thoughts and feelings were not shared and how this might play out in the relationship. Therapist then asked Don, would it be possible to ask his girlfriend if she has fears in the relationship too? Don came back to the next session and he and the therapist talked about Don's experience at home. Don discussed how initially he left feeling good from the session, but then started to have some usual doubts. He didn't follow through initially and ended up in a verbal argument with his girlfriend. However, Don reported that later, he and the girlfriend, when they were less heated, shared some of their family history. Don clarified by this by saying he shared some of his family history and being emotionally closed off in his family and started to share some of his fears and vulnerabilities with his girlfriend. Then Don said before he could ask her if she gets afraid or has fears in the relationship, he said his girlfriend started to share some of her fears in the relationship. Don reported that they talked about these fears together, felt vulnerable together, and felt more intimately connected as they were able to communicate more effectively together. Don reported this improved his feelings about himself, his ability to communicate and be vulnerable, and improve the relationship with his girlfriend. Features of Don helping help himself in his therapy. He looked at himself and his behaviors. He relaxed his personality protection system enough to let his guard down and work with himself and the therapist. He looked beyond the surface. He didn't accept defeat or believe in the status quo when it comes to therapy. He allowed himself to feel. He made efforts to gain insight and awareness into his patterns rather than expecting the therapist to point them out to him continuously. He worked together as a teammate with his therapist. Don also turned just talk into meaningful reflections and learning about himself. He engaged in investments in the session despite fears it will not work. He followed through in the sessions. He followed through after the sessions to challenge himself to go against the grain and patterns that hurt him. Brittany is a woman in her 60s. She arrives usually 10 to 15 minutes prior to the start of her therapy session. Brittany comes to the session ready to continue to talk more about what she discovered about herself from last session. She discusses how she's looking and thinking at home about how she tends to give to others excessively. She processes her emotions about this in the session with her therapist and builds on her awareness of these patterns, which reveals or helps her discover more about how she doesn't give enough to herself and how this hurts her in the long run. She then decides to make a declaration and take a stand not to give up doing for others, but make a promise to herself and her therapist that she will give herself the freedom to say no. Also, only give to someone after she gives to herself. Brittany came back to several sessions, but was eventually able to say no to demanding people in her life. She was scared at first and felt guilty. She felt like she was being selfish by doing this. This started on the first time, but then eventually got easier and easier each time as she got exposed to those emotions and started to challenge her thinking around them. She's learning more about boundaries in this session, as well as reading several books on the topic, studying and applying these concepts in her life. Features or sources of Brittany helping to help herself in her therapy. She came to the session promptly. She came to the session prepared to build on the last session. She looked at herself and her behaviors. She relaxed her personality protection system by letting her guard down and engaging more in the therapy to benefit herself. She looked beyond the surface. She didn't accept the status quo. She allowed herself to feel. She made efforts to gain insight and awareness into her problems in the therapy. She used the therapist as an instrument to help her help herself. She turned just talk in the therapy into meaningful reflections and learning about herself. Her engagement and investment in the session continued to build each time that she attended sessions. She followed through in each session. She followed through after the session. She expanded on her insight and learned more about herself in session by reading more and more about the concepts and how it affected other people so she could apply this and learn ways to apply it to herself, which in turn helped her improve her psychological health. We hope you found today's topic was useful for yourself or someone else. Let us know if it was by commenting below. Let us know what you'd like to hear about or what topics can be useful to you by commenting below, and we'll take this under consideration. If you like what you heard today and would like to hear more from Destination Psychological Wellness Hub, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You can do this by hitting the subscribe button below the screen and hitting the thumbs up. This will help you get the newest content produced by the channel to you. Please tell all your friends and family about this channel and share this and other videos with them on this channel. Encourage them too to like and subscribe. And as always, we hope your psychological wellness continues to grow with us and this community. Thank you.